Histograms are a new tool that photographers are learning how to use, and they're a great tool. Sometimes they can replace your light meter. A lot of them are in your camera menu settings somewhere buried in there. Not a lot of people use it. What the histogram can tell you is how much and where each of your RGB colors that you have in the image. If your image isn't exposed right, you can use your histogram to help diagnose what is wrong. A normal histogram will show different peaks of R, G, or B towards the middle. Not exactly in the middle, but off to the sides a little bit of the middle. But you do not want it on the far left or the far right. The far left of the histogram represents the shadows and dark areas, while the right side is the whites and the light areas, or the highlights. And so if you have the RGB spectrum on any one of those sides just a little bit too much, you will have a weird exposure. Your image won't look right, and your histogram will tell you which one's off, and then you can re-expose for that. Light meters. Next topic. There are two main light meters, reflected and incident. Reflected meters read the light coming off the subject back into the camera. Incident meters read the light touching the subject. They're usually a handheld light meter that you put in front of your subject. If you're at a portrait studio, a lot of times they'll hold the light meter in front of you and have the flash go off, and so it reads the light meter then. That's an incident. When you hold your camera up and point it at your subject, that's reflected. There are different meter weightings. There's average, spot, center weighted, and multi-segment. They all have different characteristics and advantages, and your camera may be able to switch between 2 or 3 modes. Average is a good quick way to get a meter reading. Spot meter gives you a very accurate meter reading of a little spot in what the whole area you're shooting, so you need to make sure you're not metering something too white or too dark, something right in the middle. Center weighted says that in the middle of your camera, that's the most important stuff to be metered, so it really focuses on that. But also, we don't want our sky to go completely white or something like that if it's blue, so it adjusts for that. And multi-segmented is just kind of meters all over the place and figures out what you're shooting here. You know, do you have a background that's really bright? Do you want a silhouette? Do you not want a silhouette? What your subject is, and really figures out what are you shooting and what's going to be the best situation for you there. It's also the most complicated. Exposure. I've talked a lot about exposure, but what is exposure exactly? Exposure is just a simple equation, if you want to think of it that way. Exposure is size times time, or f-stop times shutter speed. If you think of it as a math problem, just like 2 times 3 and 3 times 2 and 1 times 6 and 6 times 1 all equals 6, you've got different combinations of these numbers that give you the same answer. Same thing with exposure. You have different combinations of f-stops and shutter speeds that give you a correct exposure, but what happens is your photograph is going to look different depending on what shutter speed or f-stop you use. What if you're not sure which exposure is correct, or if it's not right? Bracketing allows you to try different settings, but you have to keep one thing constant. So if gives you an exposure of 250 and f11, maybe you decide you want to keep the f11, but you take it at 250, and you also take it at 125, and you take it at 60, and you also take it at 500, and you also take it at 1000. But all that time you've kept f11 the same. That's bracketing. You've changed your outcome of your exposure. And what do you do if you have an auto exposure camera where you aren't able to make those changes? The plus minus option that are on all the cameras will do that too. Plus adds more light to your camera, minus reduces the amount of light into your camera. Exposing a dark light or scene. We often see situations where the scene is very dark or light and our image doesn't look the way we wanted it to. If your subject is in front of a bright light, this is often what happens, and our image becomes silhouetted. And what happens is our stupid camera thinks we're trying to shoot pictures of the bright light. And here are 2 ways to fix it. One of the easiest ways is you can move up close or zoom in on your subject and take that meter reading and you might have to move your camera back to manual or something like that, depending on the type of camera you have, and take the meter reading from the up close or zoomed in, where you don't have a lot of light coming into your camera through the lens. The other option is just overexpose it by 2 settings. If the original exposure is 250 in f11, keep the original shutter speed. The original shutter speed would go down to 60 and the f-stop would stay at 11. Or you can move the f-stop, keep the f-stop at 11 and move it down to 5.6. Both times you're letting in twice amount of light 2 times for 2 settings. So you're doing a +2. And this is all in the book. It's kind of complicated and I'm going quick, but it's something that is in the book, and when you look at the samples, it makes a lot of sense.